Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today for this presentation on bridging the gaps between assessment, analytics, and instruction. I'm Dr. Philip Adam. I'm an Innovation and Accountability Specialist with McGraw-Hill Education. I'm very excited to be able to talk with you. Just a couple of things to understand as we are going through this presentation. If you have any questions that you'd like to pose either for technical support and or for something I'm saying, please put it in the Q&A window. And if you have any chat that you'd like to do, you can always put it into the chat window. But questions, please go to the question and answer window so that we know exactly how to address it and when to address it. And we'll do our best to make sure that everything we've got for you is ready to go. So if you have no other questions or anything like that, let's go ahead and get started. And I'm waiting for my technical support to put my next button on my slides. I apologize for that delay. Okay. So when we talk about bridging the gaps between the assessment, analytics, and instruction, what we're really wanting to talk about is the learning cycle. And that learning cycle is what these students are doing as they go throughout their day, but it's also what teachers and educators are doing as we work through our problems. And so what is the learning cycle? The learning cycle really starts out in this way, that as we are looking to do what's going on in our classrooms, first what we do is we start with the standards. Obviously, we want to start with what are the standards put out there, what should we be reaching towards, and we want to begin with that end in mind, making sure that whatever we're doing, we're always looking to the standard of whether or not we're hitting what we should be hitting. But within those standards, once we do that, what we do is a subset within that standard of our curriculum. So our curriculum lives within the standards, and I know that we would want to idolize that we would always look to teach every single standard, but we all know that as you're teaching, some standards are a little bit more important than other standards. Some standards are ones that you want to just mention, maybe not be core of your curriculum, and how you teach that is a part of it. So within the standards, we come up with a curriculum. And within that curriculum, we have what I call the learning cycle. So this learning cycle, again, starts with the standards, lives inside the curriculum, and this really has to do with our delivery system. It runs on how we do with our evaluation system and how we analyze those systems in order that we can deliver it to our students. So I would propose that the beginning of every learning cycle really starts with assessment planning. And while I am an assessment person, and I know a lot of people think that I kind of geek out about all these kinds of things, really assessment planning is where the learning needs to begin when we're talking about instruction. And so when people talk about instruction and assessment, really they go hand in hand with each other. And so what we need to do is take those standards inside and then use our curriculum inside the standards and start to first plan how will we show that we've achieved mastery by the students. And this becomes a very important part of our assessment and very important part of the learning cycle, that if you don't understand first how you're going to figure out that the students have achieved the learning, then really what we're doing is we're sitting in a cockpit of a plane and we say, okay, we know we're going to go to Miami and we're in New York right now. And then as you take off, you shut all the windows and doors and you fly for your 2 hours. And without ever checking how you're going to know that you've landed in Miami, you're never actually going to hit exactly where you want to be because there's so many variables along the way. So we first have to plan, like in our airline example, that successful flight would mean that we land right there in Miami. So planning your assessment of how they're going to be assessed, what you're going to assess, is going to lead us to our next part, and that next part of it is the planning for instruction. Once we know what we're going to do in the assessment, then you start planning the instruction, and you plan your instruction of how we're going to achieve the goals of the assessment. And the goals of the assessment are how we're going to show that we showed mastery in our curriculum and therefore mastery on the standards. So really they play into each other. And so once we're done with the planning of our instruction, we deliver the instruction. And this can be a couple of different ways. You can have it a project-based, you can do it lecture, you can have them reading, but whatever it is, it should relate to how in the world are we going to assess our students, and that's how you do the planning, and then you deliver the instruction to your students. And once we're done with our instruction, what we do then is deliver the assessment and the analysis. So the assessments that we plan at the beginning, we then deliver it. I know a lot of times the problem is that we plan our assessments after we've delivered our instruction. And so then our assessments end up being a mirror of what we've then delivered in the classroom. And that could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. The problem is with that is that it really then focuses on what the teacher felt was important during the instruction rather than what we felt was important prior to instruction. So then we teach exactly what we feel is important and planned on our assessment. We deliver the assessment and then we analyze our results. The analysis is another part of it, is because what we want to do is make sure that we're evaluating not only what the students learned, but we're also evaluating how we delivered that instruction. How well did we deliver it? Because if we plan the assessment ahead of time, now we can evaluate our own instruction based on those results. And so that's why when I say the learning cycle lives within your curriculum, you need to keep in mind a couple of things. First of all, am I delivering what the school board or something that lives within the standards? And number two, how well am I doing when doing this? And we know that there are some, again, things that we feel like are more important than others. So there's things in your assessment that you need to plan for, mastery needs to be achieved, and other things you may be, I need them to be aware of these types of things. So that analysis becomes very important. The analysis should then lead to your next step of the assessment planning again. So move to that next step. Now, how quickly you go around this learning cycle really has to do with how much instruction there is. And so within this learning cycle, a quick go-around is what we would call short cycle assessments. These can be something as very easy in your classroom as you asking a verbal question and getting a response back from all your students. It could be something as easy as you observing as students are going through the project themselves. So it's an informal type assessment, but you're just seeing what they do. But it can become much more formal in the long run. It'll be the longer cycle assessments when these are things that end up being evaluations of the student. These could be for letter grades. These could be something a little bit more achievable, like an end of course exam. This could be even something a little bit more formal than that, like somebody who is learning to become a doctor, and this would be their board exam. So depending on how quickly you go around this cycle, you actually are going to be placing in different levels of instruction, and that instruction needs to be changed based on your results of your assessment planning, how you deliver the instruction, what they do, and your analysis of this. So which leads me to our next point of balanced assessment. A lot of people talk about this, but let's show the relationship in balanced assessment, because in every assessment, there needs to be a purpose. And that purpose needs to be stated ahead of time in your assessment planning. And so whenever people come to me and say, well, how much should we test? I like to quote Dr. Dylan William a lot when he says, you shouldn't be testing students any more than once every minute. But beyond that, we're starting to look at, we need that data. We need the data back from our students. And so when I talk about balanced assessments and what type of assessments are out there, you need to have some of your short cycle assessments and some long cycle assessments and some of your interim assessments. That would be your midterm. And so we're looking at assessments. We want to look at the difference between frequency and the stakes that are involved. And this is an inverse relationship between the two. So that as frequency goes up, the stakes need to be lower, and as frequency goes down, the stakes need to be higher. So when we are labeling our types of assessment, this is what they look like. Our classroom assessments and progress monitoring that are up at the top. You notice these are low stakes assessments. Some of them could be for letter grades, but it's the overwhelming body of evidence that you gather from these assessments that tell you you're doing what you need to be doing in instruction, and students are therefore learning. As you do to the interim benchmark assessments or the universal screeners, and I know people have asked me many times, what's the difference between the interim assessment and a benchmark assessment? Well, if you look at all the research, there's a lot of researchers that have opinions on it, but ultimately people are using these interchangeably. And so while there may be a slight difference between the two, I use them kind of interchangeably between it. It's really, this is where they should be at a certain point in time. And so the universal screeners could also be considered a benchmark assessment or could be something else. And then you have your summative test that's only happen maybe once a year or maybe twice a year, depending on what state that you live. But normally at the top, you see these are considered the formative assessments. In other words, I'm changing my instruction based on the results. And the bottom ones, which are less in frequency, are considered our summative assessments. In other words, I'm not really changing maybe what I teach. I may be changing how I teach in the next year, but this is really an evaluation of how students do. You can see right there in the middle, those interim benchmark assessments really do overlap. And that's because they serve a couple of different purposes, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but they live in both worlds. So when people talk about a balanced assessment in the learning cycle, it's the mixture of these short-term assessments on the top, the short cycle assessments, and the long cycle assessments on the bottom. And by having a combination of them, where you have more of them at the formative and fewer of them at the summative, you're going to get a balanced approach to your assessment because it allows your teachers to get some of that quick data they need to change instruction, but then also that more formal assessment on the other end to not only evaluate how students learned, but also evaluate how the instruction was given overall. Those also can be used in the summative side to start to monitor what does your curriculum do, and then you can go back and change this curriculum, the curricula, to make sure that they match the standards that are involved. So as we say, what does a complete assessment system solve? Let's talk about these problems because I've talked about it for years and years, and I want to make sure people understand these assessments do solve problems. And while they get a bad rap in the news and they're easy to attack because kids get stressed out, teachers get stressed out, it places pressures on the school district, there's a lot of great things to assessment. And I want everybody to understand what these problems solve. When you have a complete assessment system, it gives you that data-driven instruction. And if we start and end with the student learning, you have to have assessment in place in order to have that data-driven. One of my favorite things that I say over and over is if you can't tell where you're going unless you know where you actually are. And like we talked about in the airplane, if I wanted to fly across country, I would hope that I'm looking at the assessment of the controls the whole way and making minor adjustments where we go. But a friend of mine, this is one of his favorite quotes, is from Lewis Carroll. You don't know where you are going, any road will get you there. Well, that's absolutely true. If you don't check yourself on the way, those signposts, those benchmarks, if you don't check where you are in assessment, then it doesn't matter really how you teach because you're not really comparing yourself to the standard. And that's what we're trying to do throughout the United States. That's what we're trying to do with McGraw-Hill. We're trying to change learning and how we learn because we are a learning science company, and we want to make sure that we're learning how students learn in order that we can deliver better instruction and increase student achievement. The next problem it solves is quick and easy results. You know, if we rely only on our classroom assessments to get results, or we rely only on summative assessments to get results, you don't get the full picture. And sometimes those summative assessments don't come back fast enough. So you want those results, those quick and easy results that are easy to read reports, and to make sure that it gives you the data you need in order to change your instruction. I know there are some assessments out there, and I know when I was a student, I used to get these assessment reports, and they'd give them to me, and I'd start reading through it, and I had no idea what they meant. Well, if you have an assessment system in place, or you have an assessment in place that just gives you one piece of data or some information that you don't know what to do with it, it's not a valuable test to you. And so I get this a lot of times when I go into school districts and consult with them, that they ask me the question of, we test too much. You know, why in the world are we testing as much as we do? And I say, we're not testing enough. When people tell me that they're testing too much, usually I hear one of two things. It's A, I don't understand why we're giving the test, or B, I don't understand the results. And then there's always a third one of, I don't understand why in the world these results are coming in and what to do with the results once I have them. And so these quick and easy results are an important part when you are looking for an assessment system. You need to have one that gives you back these results with computer scored. There may be some that teachers have to score, but by having an assessment system in place, whether it is a computer-based or whether it is something you created in your district, you need to make sure that these results come back very quickly to students, because we found that if you don't get those results after a couple of days, it doesn't matter if they get them anyway. They will simply move on to the next point. And so our next point of the thing it's solving is this common language across your district. By having an assessment system, Now when you are talking to other teachers, you have an understanding of what they are looking for, what you are looking for, and this common language between the two of you gives you that data analysis language so that then you can start looking at how is our curriculum being delivered, what's the quality of our curricula. This common language serves a purpose that when you have those professional learning communities together with each other and you want to talk about data, everybody is on the same page because everybody is using a common language. And then also it shows strengths and opportunities for improvement. I don't like to say weaknesses in the school district. There's always opportunities for improvement. So the big thing is it shows you what you're doing well as a district. An assessment system like this will also tell you where the holes are in your curriculum so you can either shore them up or make conscientious decisions of this is something we don't want to pursue. We'd like to move our resources into a much broader scale so we can attack this other problem over here. By doing these assessment system, you're going to start solving problems. And a well-designed assessment system and a well-executed assessment system in your district actually reduces the amount of time where people will complain about assessments because now they understand the purpose of them. And so when you are doing things that are then communicating with your board, communicating with parents, they understand why you're doing assessments, and it makes your job a whole lot easier because now you have the information you need to be a much more effective teacher. So let's talk about what are the parts of an assessment system. First one are these classroom assessments. I would say these are probably the most important ones to a classroom teacher, and so a well-designed classroom assessment can really take you from step one to the next few steps in place of getting your students ready. These are usually the do-it-yourself assessments. And so if you have an assessment system or you don't have one and you're looking for one, make sure you're looking for one with a large item bank, something in which you can not only build your own items to put in there, but by having resources that you draw from. And now when I say an item bank, I'm going to say quality matters. Now, a lot of people put quantity first. They say we have 60,000, we have 80,000, we have 100,000 items in their item banks. Well, if they're not good quality items, you may only end up with about 2,000 quality items to where when you're asking the student a question, there's enough reliability in that question that you're getting confident results that they did meet the learning goal or they didn't meet the learning goal. And so that's why I say in here, new items, emergence matters. So one question you need to ask when you're looking for an assessment system is, how old are these items? When did you write these? Were these written in the last 5 years? Were these written in the last 15 years? Have you just realigned all your old items? How many of these are newer items for you? While I'm not saying old items are bad items, I am saying the newer items are going to match much closer to our next generation standards. And that level of rigor needs to be a little bit higher, and the way they're asking is a little bit differently because it's all based on evidence. They need to be able to produce evidence rather than just, I can pick A, B, C, or D. While a multiple choice question is a great question, if they're not having to think while they do it, then all we're doing is promoting the students who are good guessers in our class. And so those do-it-yourself assessments are important by doing it that way because then you have the system that is scoring for them, and as the teacher, you get to focus not on the grading the papers all the time, but now you're focused on how do I analyze these so that tomorrow or in the next 5 minutes I can change my assessments in my classroom. I used to do it as a teacher myself. I'd have a 5-question quiz every day at the beginning of class, so I knew what parts that they studied the night before and what parts I needed to recover before we moved on to our next point. Beyond classroom assessments, you need to make sure that it is a standards-based type process. With the emphasis on the new standards, the next generation of standards, whether they're science, social studies, or whether you've gone with Common Core or your state-specific standards, when you have an assessment system, it needs to be a standards-based reporting back to you. So not only am I looking at an item analysis to where they got the first 5 wrong or what they guessed on the first 5 or what they answered in the next 3, but it has to come back in a way that gathers together your standards. So we're looking at a mastery-based level or a standards-based approach to grading. You need to be able to see what is it that our students are doing well and where are their opportunities for improvement. Again, if you can't understand the standards-based reporting, it's not a useful report to you. So it needs to be something that is easy to read, gets you the information back quickly, and also lets you have an understanding of what am I going to do next with this data. As we move apart on our next part of it, we move from the classroom assessments to our benchmark assessments, or these are, some people call them interim assessments. These live in between that summative and formative world. And why is that? Is because they usually have, in the formative sense, reporting so that it's quickly enough that teachers can start looking at, okay, here's what we did well in this quarter or this semester. Here's what we still need to work on. But it also rolls up to the district level. And in that rolling up to the district level, they have some understanding of how are all of our students doing on this set of standards, or how are all of our students doing on testing, or how are all of our students doing on written response. Between those two worlds, that gives you a lot of great information. When I'm saying you're looking for a benchmarking assessment, I would say you need to look for a couple of things. First of all, you really need to look to see, is it scaled? In other words, can I compare results from one test to the next test? Or is it just a plain percent correct? If it's just a plain percent correct, then you really have no idea what's going on there. So in a scaled score, it's designed to be a vertical scale so that I can compare how my students do from one grade level to the next or in between the grade levels. That shows you also it has the research base in order for you to make these confident decisions. And it also shows you that the company you're going with is committed to making sure they have a quality item for you. McGraw-Hill Education, we have a lot of good researchers, and we are looking to make sure in our interim assessments for acuity, we have a scaled so that you can see how students are doing all the way up through grade levels and start comparing results. You also want to look for some of those other things in there, like growth. You want to look for how are they doing from one to the next. So national percentiles might be another good thing you would want in there. But you want other ways to describe how students are doing so that you can start taking a look at from year to year, are we getting better? And that's really the question that you have to answer to your community at large always is, are we getting better? Are we falling behind, or are we staying the same? And these benchmarking assessments is one way to help you do that. Again, in a benchmark assessment, you want a standards-based approach to it. And also in that benchmark assessment, I would hope that you're going to look for something that will get you ready for the summative test, whether it's your state test, whether it's a national test, a NAEP, or something to that effect. You want something that will give you a prediction, something that will mirror what it looks like there. You want something that is hard. And we recently saw that Muhammad Ali passed away, but he had a great idea when he talked, in that he hated training every single day, but he knew he had to do it in order to get ready for every one of his fights. And so you need a test that will cause your kids to struggle a little bit in the benchmark, because what you want them to do is work out all of their problems, and so you understand all the problems before they get to that summative end of the year test. And so if your benchmarking test is a little bit harder than the summative test, in my mind that's okay, because you're going to see those problems there, but it needs to be a similar experience. If it becomes too easy for the students, they're just going to guess their way through it or answer quickly, and then you feel like you're doing a great job. If it becomes too hard, obviously they're going to shut down. So it needs to be very close to the difficulty you're going to see for that summative assessment, gets them ready. So it has, in that summative test as well, or in that benchmarking test to get you ready, you also need to look for technology-enhanced items. So those are becoming much, much more prevalent on assessments and the next generation of assessments. And we're finding research that shows people with exposure to those types of items tend to do better at the end of the year because it's getting them ready. Research-based item construction. There needs to be a way to construct those items that has a research to them. If somebody comes out and says, oh, in 1 year we constructed 30,000 items, that would be very difficult to do because you're going to have to do a lot of testing to that. So make sure that when you're looking for an evaluation system or an assessment system, you look for something that has the research behind it, and they have a research division that can give you the explanation to it. Make sure you, again, as I said before, a variety of scores, as growth, as percentile, scale scores. These are not only pointing to the research behind it, but now you can start comparing where am I compared to where am I supposed to be. And then I'll say this one thing between a fixed or an adaptive. I know a lot of people have a tendency to go one way or another, and they say, oh, you have to do this because that's the most important thing. But I always say, be careful what you get. There are different purposes to having a fixed test as compared to having an adaptive assessment. An adaptive assessment is great at finding out how each individual student is doing, But make sure you get the right type of adaptive engine. It doesn't just get easier or harder, but it's the research behind it. And make sure that when it reports to you on an adaptive engine, that it says they're doing well on the standard, they actually got questions on that standard, and not an interpolative score that says, well, because they got this scale score, they must do well on the standard because everybody else who did. Make sure that you're having an adaptive engine that actually asks them the question and does it in a way that's very efficient so that students aren't taking too much time testing, but it gets you the results you need based on actual asking. But if you're looking for something that says, how are my students doing on this type of question overall, you're going to have to go with a fixed form. And a fixed form is great at finding out how groups are doing. Now, it doesn't get as good down to the individual student level, but if a teacher says, how did all my students do on this standard, a fixed form will do that for you because every kid is being asked the exact same question. And in that sense, you can make those results widespread across the classroom, across the school, and across the district because you're doing it in a fixed manner. And so is adaptive better than fixed or fixed better than adaptive? Neither one is better, neither one is. It all depends on what's your goal in assessment. And that's when I go back to the learning cycle of assessment planning is very important. Make sure you're very judicious about which assessments you want to give, and make sure you are very intentional on how you plan that so that as you're giving the instruction, you are mirroring what the result is going to be like on that assessment, and so you know that you're getting a true answer from it. And so we at McGraw-Hill Education want to become a partner in education with you. We've been doing this for many, many, many years, and we really want to know how do students learn, and we want to share that information with you, and we want to learn lessons from you. The great thing about this company, and I love working for this company, is that when we are working together with people, we are learning as much from them as they are from us, and so we're taking the ideas that they're giving us and making better products as we go throughout. And so with your assessment needs are growing, we are with Acuity, and our Acuity assessments are changing this year to try to better handle the results that are coming from the students and from the next generation of assessments, and we want to make sure that you as teachers have better results to you. And so what we've done now is we've expanded our coverage. Our coverage are from K to 12 items, whereas before we were in our benchmark assessments were 3 to 8, and we had diagnostic testing at K to 2 and 9 through 12. What we've done is we now have a single form 3 times a year for grades 1 through 12 and twice in the year for kindergarten, to where we are measuring the standards. These are going to be scaled all the way through. What we have to do is, and our 3 through 8 is already scaled, and we are going to be scaling the K1-2 and the high school assessment based on that. And so it's all in a single online fixed form. It's a single session administration so that it will save you a little bit of time, that you don't have to do other things to it. It's all done in one sit down. And there's technology-enhanced items. We are increasing the amount of technology-enhanced items that we're doing because, again, we want to make sure we have it. And somebody's asking, what are some examples of our technology-enhanced items? I don't have them live for you now, but Megan, I will get you my contact information at the end and be more than happy to send those to you. But these technology-enhanced items are doing things like matching. We're dragging and dropping. We're able to fill buckets. We're doing gridded response items. So what we're trying to do is make the interaction more readily available with the question itself. We're also making sure that these are computer-scored technology-enhanced items, again, so that teachers don't have to do any extra. And the other part of that is that we're going to be still improving our product. So I would say a year from now, we're even going to make it so that school districts can actually build their own technology-enhanced items using our tools in there. So we're really making it much more readily available, not only for school districts, but for students to interact with this information. Again, when I talk about the scoring, all of our items in that single form are auto-scored, and we have expanded our bundles with a lower pricing. In other words, we're bundling a lot of different things in our assessment system at a lower price to make sure that you have it readily available to you and makes it cost effective so that everyone can do this. In addition to that, we also have optional performance tasks that we're including with this. So if you want a single session form, you can use that, or you can actually opt for having 2 sessions where session 1 would be all computer scored items and session 2 includes performance tasks. Or you can use those performance tasks in an instructional manner. What we're trying to do is, again, give you the tools you need to get the information you need as teachers in order to make sure that everything that you do really starts you into the way of looking at how are these students learning, how can I change my instruction. Again, by that assessment planning and through the instructional delivery and analysis, we're going to find that the learning cycle actually flows much, much easier when you're doing these hand in hand. And so my question to you all is, what questions do you have? Do I need to cover again, or maybe I need to go a little more in depth? You have that Q&A box on the side. Please put that in there. I'd be more than happy to answer your questions. I have another one come in about information about the research about technology-enhanced item exposure. Tamara, if you will email me, I will get you that information, but I believe it was a report that was sent out by Smarter Balance, and I want to say it was approximately a month ago, but I will get you that reference and put that out as quickly as possible. Have any other questions from anyone? If you think of questions, I see another one came in from, we are heavily focused on PBL in our district. What tips do you have for creating a good rubric for projects? That's a great. What tips do we have for creating rubrics for projects? In project-based learning, really I would say you start with the standard. And then when you start with the standard, don't think about what the project is going to be. A good way to do that is come up with what information would the students be able to produce that shows that they have achieved mastery on that standard, whether it's part of the standard, if you've unpacked it, or if you've repacked it in a different way. You have to first start with the evidence. So by starting with that evidence of what do they have to produce, and it backs up into creating that, creating a good rubric for that, because once you have the evidence, then you can separate it out of they need to be able to do this, this, and this, and that shows the evidence. And if you don't start with what evidence shows it, then you're kind of working in a backward manner, and you find that you start looking at, well, how well did they present it, rather than how good was the information they gave us. So that's the biggest piece of information I would give for project-based learning, is really start looking for the standard. Start with the standard, and then decide on what evidence shows that you've mastered that standard. And that evidence, I wouldn't say has to be very specific, as in they need to be able to, make a milk carton 3 inches high and cut it here. But no, it needs to be something to where many different projects could satisfy that with the evidence that they're producing. Any other questions before we end today? I'd like to thank everybody for their time. You can see I have my contact information on the screen. Feel free to call or email me. And if you need somebody to come to your district and talk a little bit more about this, or talk about the differences that we have in McGraw-Hill education benchmarking assessments or formative assessments, or you'd like to see a little bit more about acuity, I can direct you to the person that would be more than happy to come to your district, or I can come to you personally. We're excited about where education is going. We're excited about the enhancements to technology, and we're really loving the fact that with all the resources in McGraw-Hill education, we can start connecting your assessments directly to the curriculum and the resources that you're purchasing from McGraw-Hill education, so we can be your complete solution. And we're doing it every day to make it easier and easier for you to buy a complete package and understand that you can take us from the assessment planning all the way through to the assessment delivery and analysis with the resources that we have in McGraw-Hill Education. So thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to hearing from all of you.